Number one, the bottom line then. And some people, they're not going to like this one, but it is absolutely crucial to your weight loss success. You must be in a calorie deficit. I know, Ryan, that's so boring. That's what everyone else says. It's a nightmare, all that calorie counting nonsense. I know. Trust me, I've been there. I was a calorie counter for the best part of 18 months. It drove me absolutely nuts. But at the same time, what you do need to accept is that calories are a fundamental law of weight loss. Don't get it twisted. I'm the first to admit that there's far more to weight loss. And it is far more complex than that simple sort of calories in versus calories out equation. Think about things like hormones and the metabolism, gut bacteria too. These things do play a really critical role in your weight loss efforts. But at the same time, calories are still a metric that you, number one, must respect, and number two, pay attention to. And there's a lot of people, I feel, in this vegan plant-based community who simply are not willing to do just that. And it's to their own detriment because they wanted to leave all that calorie stuff behind in their weight loss past. And I get that. I understand that. Trust me, I've been there. I promise you I've been there. But at the same time, that doesn't invalidate their role. Just because you don't want to calorie count anymore, that doesn't mean that calories don't have value and aren't still a fundamental law, as I say, of weight loss. So you might well be eating incredibly healthfully right now, and this is a really important distinction, intentional weight loss requires something different, something more, right? It isn't simply the case that you can necessarily just eat plants. We've all heard that motto. Oh, just eat plants and you'll lose weight. Well, you probably wouldn't be watching this live stream if you were already slim and you'd followed just eat plants and that had worked out for you. So just by default, if you're here today watching this video looking for advice, it's very likely that you've tried, at least to some degree of consistency, to quote unquote just eat plants, and it hasn't worked for you and you're looking for more. You realize inherently through your own feedback, feedback from your own actions, that maybe there is more to this whole weight loss stuff than just eating plants, like many, sadly, of my fellow YouTubers might tell you. You do need something more. And there is a difference. Of course, there's overlap, but there is a difference about eating for health, eating for health and eating for weight loss. It requires something intentional. And calories are a really integral part of that. Now, many of the following reasons on this list can and will contribute to you not being in a suitable calorie deficit. So I have to start out with this one as our number one reason as to why you might still be overweight. It's a very likely reason as to why you're still overweight right now. Many of the other things I cover here, as I say, will circle back to this main theme. So it had to be number one for me. Number two, your meals are way too complex and overwhelming. Goodness me, I see this loads, especially on Instagram, especially if you go to a grocery store and you start opening a bookshop or something like that, and you go to the cookbook section, start opening, never mind just vegan cookbooks, start opening cookbooks in any sort of cuisine or diet philosophy. It's an absolute nightmare. I don't know why people are so obsessed with these complex recipes. It's beyond my imagination, though that said, I'm not a foodie, so maybe I wouldn't particularly understand it. But I see this so much, people sacrificing, number one, simplicity, and two, practicality, and therefore their own adherence, their own ability to actually stick to this consistently. Consistency is going to be a bit of a buzz theme, let's say, or a buzzword throughout, but therefore you sacrifice your own adherence. And that's why now in this part of this video, if I'm in any position whatsoever to give it, I'm not assuming I am, but if I'm in any kind of position to give it, I'd love to give you permission right now to just keep things simple. And this is something I stress to all of my new clients when they onboard to the Vegan Slim and Sustain coaching program. Look, we're going to keep things really simple here. Not so simple that you're just doing like very basic mono meals and your workouts are always the same, for example. So that goes beyond the nutrition. But let's say with the exercise too, you do exactly the same workout every day. That will quickly become ineffective. You need some sense of variety with both the food, some semblance of variety, with both the food and the exercise. So we're not keeping it absurdly simple, where it's like, just eat this one food and you'll lose weight. You know, I'm an advocate in part of things like the rice diet and potato resets and that sort of thing. But I think as a mono diet on their own, I really think it's the wrong way to go. I don't advise that. So I want you right now to give yourself permission, if I may encourage you to do so, to keep things simple. Stop looking through those cookbooks and looking for recipes with 20 plus ingredients and really elaborate items that maybe you have to dig through, 6 health food stores just to find, or order online. Keep it really simple, and you're going to lower, this is the key, you're going to lower the barrier to entry. Okay, it might be fancy. Okay, you might be a bit of a foodie. Try those things in time. But for your first couple of weeks, like I do with my clients, I really stress to you, let's just be pretty repetitive, to the point not where it's boring, but to the point where you streamline things, right? If you're always doing different kinds of meals with loads of complex ingredients and very long preparation and cooking time, you're shooting yourself in the foot. I really feel that is the case. And what's the problem with this? What's the bottom line? Because if you can adhere to complex and recipes that I find overwhelming, you might not find them overwhelming, but if you can adhere to the more complex and elaborate recipes, then it might not actually be a problem. You might lose plenty of weight eating this way, absolutely. But so many people set the bar too high with this stuff. What happens when your meals are too complex for you? That's the distinction I should add, for you. What happens when they're too overwhelming for you? You wobble, you grab convenience foods. We've all done it. We've all been there, where the very thought of going home and having to prepare X, Y, Z foods, it's going to be 30 minutes before I actually get to sit down and eat, or maybe I've got to take care of the kids' meals first before I can even have mine. I'll just pick up something for myself. I'll just order something in. We've all done it. We've all been there. I'm certainly on no moral high ground. So you have to make things simple to yourself to lower the barriers to entry. If you need inspiration on what to eat to get started being consistent with this way of eating, I've done at least 3 to 4, maybe even slightly more meal plan videos in my history here on YouTube. So simply go to my channel after watching this video, use the little search function in the top right. That's if you're viewing it on desktop anyway, and just search the words meal plan and you'll see a bunch of videos from me that will give you hopefully some decent ideas to get started with. Reason number 3 as to why you might still be overweight on a plant-based diet. I'm just going to check you can all hear me okay, see me okay. Yeah, evening, Mark. Hi, everyone just joining me in the chat. Number 3 then. Eating too many fat-rich plant foods. I've talked about this one a lot, and many other people bring attention to this, so I don't think it needs so much from me here today. But quite simply, we're going back to that calorie idea. I'm sorry to say yet again. The calorie surplus you're in is the bottom line, or calorie maintenance, let's say, level that you're at and that you're hitting fairly regularly. That's the bottom line here. But a big contributor to calories overall are these fat-rich plant foods, more so than other plant foods. And we'll come to exactly which ones in just a second. Why is that the case then? Why are these fat-rich plant foods something to maybe treat a little bit tentatively versus lower fat plant foods? Well, first of all, this is from a calorie perspective, and that's the main argument that people have with the fat-rich plant foods. Per gram, fat yields 9 calories versus carbohydrate and protein, which only yield 4. So that's less than half rather, isn't it, by comparison? And so if you can think of, a fat-rich meal versus a carbohydrate/protein-rich meal, you could have the same volume of food, let's say the same weight of food on a plate, but the 2 calorie counts of either plate would be starkly different, simply as a result of the different macronutrients between the meals. The fat-rich meal could be over, it depends exactly the components, of course, but it could be over double the amount of calories for the same volume, which is quite startling when you think about it like that. So per gram, basically, fat is a lot more calorific than the other 2 big macronutrients, being carbohydrate and protein. And that's generally speaking why there's almost this arm's length from the sort of, let's say, high carb faction of this overall whole foods plant-based community. And I agree to large part with their criticisms of these fat-rich plant foods. I just don't think total exclusion is the appropriate or healthful or sustainable response to that problem of fat-rich plant foods being a little bit more calorific. That said, though, might be that you are simply eating, quote unquote, too many of those right now. And again, like I say, it's the overall surplus or amount of calories that you're taking in that's going to be the barrier versus the individual ingredients necessarily. That said, these fat-rich plant foods, they can be such a contributor to those overall calories that they deserve me mentioning here. They deserve me bringing attention to them here. So things like nuts, seeds, avocado, nut butters, don't get me wrong, these are nutrient-packed foods that absolutely can be part of a weight loss encouraging diet, but they are very calorie rich. They're all different items, so it depends on the exact food in question. I've given you 3 or 4 there as an example. So yeah, they are all different, but generally speaking, they're very calorie rich compared to the other whole grains, fruits, veggies, beans, potatoes, and so on. So it's comparatively that these foods give you less, let's say, less bang for your buck from a calorie perspective. Does that make sense? So that's why I make the argument here that don't totally exclude the fat-rich plant foods, but perhaps be a bit more mindful of them than you might be right now. This might not apply to you, but if you find yourself snacking on a whole bag of cashew nuts every evening, you'll do a lot better by switching those for something like berries, okay? Because comparatively, calorie per pound, it's a lot better move if you're having to play that calorie game, if you're in a plateau right now. Reason number 4 as to why you might still be overweight on a plant-based diet: you suffer from cravings, emotional eating, self-sabotage, all of which can stop you from being consistent. So perhaps sometimes you are in a suitable calorie deficit for you, but maybe it's not often and consistent enough, maybe it's not frequent enough to the need. And that's a big problem, isn't it? I see a lot of people, they come to me. I actually have clients who start with me, and when we do a bit of a diet review, when they fill out their intake form, when they start working with me, and when we jump on our game plan coaching call, it's quite amazing how close they are to actually breaking through with weight loss, because they're already doing so many things right. And it might be that Monday through Friday they're doing particularly well, or it might be that 2 out of 3 meals of the day are actually what I would consider weight loss friendly and healthy meals. Maybe it's even 3 meals, but then the Ben and Jerry's can come out in the evening. Don't get me wrong, I've been there. You probably know my story by now with the old Ben and Jerry's cookie dough back in my student years. I shouldn't laugh about it. It was pretty bad actually at times. But that's the bottom line, isn't it? We keep going back to this calories thing, and I hate to be a bore on it, I hate to be a broken record on it, but you may well be in an appropriate calorie deficit using, because it's not just enough to be in a calorie deficit. From a health perspective, you want to be in a calorie deficit that's suitable for you using good quality, nourishing foods, right? You can be in a calorie deficit eating Pop-Tarts if you like. I wouldn't recommend it though. So yeah, you might well be in a calorie deficit some days or some parts of the day, or it might be lining up like you can be in an overall calorie deficit one day. But then the evening snacking, for example, or the 3 to 4 p.m. trot over from your office to the the vending machine, that could be enough to really, quote unquote, tip the scales, pardon the obvious pun there. So what you have to do here is you have to ask yourself, where am I going wrong? Where am I being inconsistent? What are the leaks in my ship? Now, there are many causes of inconsistency. I'll touch on more as we go. And even when I was talking about the likes of meals being too complex, point number 2, that's a consistency problem, isn't it, as the bottom line? So there are many causes of inconsistency, as I say, but I think the mental and emotional side is particularly what I'm talking about on this point number 4. I started out by mentioning cravings, emotional eating, and self-sabotage, didn't I? I think the mental and emotional side is a very, very neglected one. You might well know, quote unquote, what to do from a weight loss perspective. You might know how to assemble a healthy and weight loss friendly plate of food, but that doesn't mean you can actually implement it consistently around the clock and actually stick to that. It's one thing knowing what to do. It's one thing having the information. It's another thing actually doing it day in, day out. So you have to really be in the right mind frame to mentally execute on this stuff day in, day out, and do it enough, string enough good days / good weeks together in a row to actually build some momentum, watch the scale go down, and tap into that amazing feedback loop that comes when you start losing weight. It's really hard when you're not losing weight to stay motivated, to stay focused, because you're not seeing results for all your hard efforts. But trust me, as soon as you break through, the way that makes you feel, to be rewarded for your commitments, for honoring your word and saying, yes, I really am going to do this. It's such a brilliant feeling. It just makes you more ambitious. You lose 5 or 10 pounds, which initially you might have been delighted with. And you're kind of like, you know what? I'm not going to settle here. I want more, more, more. I've seen people with 200 pounds to lose get to their goal weight and then say, you know what, I want to do a half marathon now, because it just makes them more and more ambitious. Whereas 2 years ago, they'd have just been delighted to lose 50 pounds, 100 pounds of that. But they've flown down the scale. They've built confidence and self-belief in themselves. They've seen that they can shift their identity. They've seen their own potential and ability to change. And it's a really amazing feeling to tap into that. So yeah, anyway, I digress slightly there. You need to be in the right frame of mind to actually execute on this stuff day in, day out. That's the bottom line in what I'm trying to say here. So yeah, you might well be suffering from cravings, emotional eating, self-sabotage, etc., etc. What's your action step if that resonates with you? If anything on this tip resonates with you, you need to fix the leaks in your ship. Ask yourself, where am I going wrong? What moods or emotions are causing me to go off track? What activities am I doing? What relationships am I engaging in that might just need to be tweaked somewhat so I'm less likely to go off track? Reason number 5 as to why you might not be losing weight on a plant-based diet. Your calorie deficit is actually, and this one might surprise you a little bit, it's actually way too aggressive. Your calorie deficit is actually too big. I'll take a dramatic pause before I jump into that one to have a sip of water, folks. And I will say thank you very much for joining me if you're just here. Thank you to everyone in the chat letting me know that they can hear me okay. I really appreciate that. Okay, onwards. So yeah, your calorie deficit is way too aggressive. So yes, as I've argued throughout this so far, you do need a calorie deficit. You need to be in one. But you'll risk being eternally hungry, if you're anything like me, a little bit cranky, and you're actually posing a threat to the likes of hormones and metabolic rate by undereating, by having a calorie deficit that is frankly too aggressive for you. And, you know, the results of this are quite obvious. And we've all done maybe extreme bouts of weight loss, or rather extreme methods of weight loss in the past. So I think the vast majority of people watching this right now will resonate. Weight loss can be really fast in the short term when you have a very aggressive deficit, when you eat very little calories. If you do something like a juice cleanse, which I haven't personally done, but just by way of example, if you do something like a juice cleanse, the weight loss you can start off with is absolutely incredible. But the amount of people that can actually sustain juicing around the clock is very, very minimal. It's hard to upkeep. And so is it really worth it? Is it really worth it to risk consistency and longevity to just lose weight a little bit faster in the short term? I would argue absolutely not. And you're probably aligned with me. Otherwise, you wouldn't like my channel. You probably wouldn't be watching this here today. So where should it be? That raises a very good question as to where should it be? You know, if you want to be in a calorie deficit, but you don't want it to be too big a calorie deficit, what should that look like? Well, this really depends on lots of variables, sadly. I have to kind of sit on the fence slightly on this one and say that it's all relative, because frankly, that's how I see things. It is all relative. It depends on your current body weight and a number of other factors, of course. But if I had to sort of nail my sort of flag in the sand a little bit, I would say, it's generalist, but I would say that you might want to start out with like a 250 to 300 calorie deficit. You hear a lot about this 500 calorie thing to create 3,500 calories over a 7-day period. I don't put too much stock in that. I know Dr. Greg has talked about how flawed that can be. I think have I made a video where I've talked about how flawed that can be? I don't know. I think I've spoken about it on Instagram, but it's a good reminder for something for me to cover here, why I think that's silly. But 250 to 300 calories, I think is a much more moderate approach. Now, again, there's some people for whom that's too big, that's too small, blah, blah, blah. But I had to give something here just to give you guys some ideas and some inspiration to get started with. Generally, I really need to work with someone to understand them better to then advise what is a suitable calorie deficit. But I've got to give you something to work with here. And I just wanted to sort of ridicule slightly that sort of very arbitrary go-to 500 calorie deficit that many people reference. I don't like that. So just be careful that your calorie deficit isn't too aggressive. And look, I see people do this unknowingly. And I think you are more susceptible. I really do believe you're more susceptible to this as a vegan or plant-based dieter because these foods have such a low caloric density. But I've seen many vegans and plant-based dieters unknowingly eat too little food because the volume and the bulk and the fiber that you get from these amazing nutrient-rich, as I say, typically there are exceptions to this, but these typically very low calorie density plant foods, you get so full for so few calories. And so, yeah, it's definitely possible to undereat. And if that is the case for you, you just need to modify your diet a little bit so that you make sure that you're actually getting sort of more calories per gram / per pound per ounce of food. So you don't have to get quite so stuffed to intake adequate calories. Does that make sense? Bit of a word waffle from me there, but hopefully that makes sense. So that one was number 5. Your calorie deficit is actually way too aggressive. Be very mindful of this for the short term. It'll work from a weight loss perspective. We're playing a long-term game here, folks. As you'll have heard me say probably many, many times before, might be a bit of a cliche from me at this stage, but people often overestimate how much weight they can lose in a month and underestimate how much weight they can lose in a year. This isn't to say that weight loss has to be really, really slow, but when you deploy some patience, you tap into a different mental frame, you make different decisions, you stop your head getting turned by the latest sort of diet or whatever you see online or whatever your friend tells you that they're doing weight loss, you're better able, I think, to resist that, double down on what you're doing. And again, here's another Ryan Adams cliche at this stage, trust the process, right? Number 6, then, you're worried that age, medical conditions, or the menopause make it impossible to lose weight. There are other scenarios, let's say, or circumstances, conditions that I could throw into the categories I've just given. And I appreciate that those aren't all related necessarily or all particularly similar to one another, those being age, medical conditions, reaching the menopause, and so on. But these are things that I hear very, very often, that I'm too old, Ryan, to lose weight. I could lose weight better when I was younger. Or, Ryan, can I lose weight? I've got Hashimoto's, Ryan, can I lose weight? I've entered the menopause. And situations. Could there be truth to these things? Again, like I say, they're all slightly different things, so I'm trying to sort of sum them up in one brief answer. It's a bit complex. Could there be truth to these things? The short answer is maybe. Maybe there is truth to these things. You know, I think it's pretty clear that age can prohibit weight loss. The data is fairly obvious on that in my mind. But is that necessarily about age as a biological factor so much as the lifestyle sort of compounding that happens with age? That's a hard thing. That's a hard distinction to make. That's a hard thing to separate. And so, you know, I have absolute reason to believe it depends on, for example, medical conditions. It depends on exactly what we're talking about, doesn't it? But yeah, these things can absolutely stand in your way. These things can absolutely affect adrenals, hormone function, various other mechanisms, let's say, biologically. Absolutely they can. Absolutely they could make your body more resistant or stubborn to weight loss. Or medication you're taking could make your body more resistant or stubborn to weight loss. Menopause can certainly do that in terms of the way it changes you hormonally. Definitely, that is my experience anecdotally as a coach and from what I've learned about this stuff over the years, you know, doing my own research. This stuff is absolutely a barrier to weight loss success. However, even if weight loss is harder for you, I think you probably know what I'm going to say here because you guys know what I think if you've been following me long enough. You got to be so careful that you don't use that as like copium or rather a crutch to hold on to as a reason not to try or as a reason to give up or as a reason to confirm all the limiting beliefs you have about yourself when you make a mistake. I see this all the time. People make a mistake and they go, see, I knew this was impossible for me. See, I couldn't do it. And I'm like, whoa. Has that mistake got anything to do with one of those underlying conditions or a biological factor? And in many cases, the answer is a resounding no. It's actually nothing to do with them. They went and ate off track because their friend offered them pizza. It was nothing to do with the fact they're in menopause. Does that make sense? But you can sort of hold on to these things as a bit of a crutch or copium. I know I certainly did in the past. And so you just got to have enough self-awareness, I suppose, and be willing to take enough sort of responsibility and being honest enough with yourself. Easier said than done, to be fair. I'm laughing at it nonchalantly, like it's a really easy thing to do, like I can do it all the time. I absolutely can't. But you've got to have enough self-awareness in the moment to be like, well, hold on a second. Why did I actually go off track here? What's the real reason? And should I just sort of isolate the mistake as a mistake rather than sort of letting it confirm any insecurities, fears, or doubts I have about my own inabilities to lose weight? So just be careful with it. So things like age, to sum up, things like age, medical conditions, menopause, can they make it impossible to lose weight? No, I don't argue impossible. Can they make it harder to lose weight though? Yeah, absolutely. To what degree? Well, it depends what we're talking about. It varies. It depends case by case in the individual. And to some degree, you'll never actually know. Let's say you've got a medical condition. How could you actually test how much of a difference that makes? It would be a very, very hard study to run, right? So yeah, I do absolutely believe that these things have the propensity to really slow you down from a weight loss perspective. And some of them can really limit how maybe lean you could get. You might not have a problem losing weight, but they might well limit how lean you could ultimately get, for sure. But just be careful that you don't settle on that as a crutch or a reason to not even try. I knew I couldn't do it anyway. There's something wicked about the human ego that almost likes our own failure, because we can sit there and then justify staying in our comfort zone. I knew I couldn't do it. I knew my body was stubborn. Careful with that stuff. Reason number 7 as to why you might still be overweight despite adhering to this incredible approach to nutrition. Yes, sadly, it can happen. Number 7, then, eating out. Again, this goes back to consistency. You might well be consistent for a high percentage of your meals or a high percentage of the days in your overall week, but fairly frequent meals out could, not necessarily, but could halt that progress. I want to be careful not to sort of make this, or maybe my style of the whole foods plant-based diet, sound so utterly Puritan that you can never eat out again. That isn't my stance. You guys that follow me maybe more closely, certainly on Instagram, you'll know that I do eat out from time to time. And even generally, even though there were parts of my weight loss journey where I hardly ate out, I still could lose weight whilst eating out. Absolutely is possible. I don't advocate some Puritan thing where you never eat out again because, oh my goodness, they put a bit of oil on my food. You have to let some of that stuff go to actually live in the modern world and still sort of balance other areas of your life and have a good, fulfilled life. So there is some cause to sort of bend the rules a little bit here. That said, though, if you're eating out a lot, I'm just talking about eating out every now and again. If you're eating out a lot, yeah, that could well be stopping you from moving the needle from a weight loss perspective. So generally, yeah, as I always say, you can lose plenty of weight eating out now and again. And it won't be that disruptive unless you're doing it often or you're not making the greatest choices. Because you can eat out. Like oftentimes when I eat it now, I'm going to like a local place here that does these amazing little bowls with tofu, bunch of veggies, and like a cashew sauce. Super clean, as good as what I might make at home in some cases. Some cases a little bit of oil, or things that I might not have in the kitchen so much necessarily. But generally speaking, fairly, let's say, compliant with how I would eat at home ordinarily anyway. So yeah, you can eat out often. And if you're going to the salad bar or you're grabbing smoothies, might not be that big a problem. But let's assume, because most people's version of eating out is going to be a slightly less than ideal meal, a slightly less than clean meal. And if you're doing that, quote unquote, often enough, I was going to say, quote unquote, too often, but then the question is, well, what's too often? But if you're doing that often enough that your weight isn't moving, yeah, of course, obviously that needs to be something that gets looked at. So it might well be worth making yourself, so here's the action step for this one. It might well be worth making yourself a rule for how many times you're going to eat out a week. Some people don't like that sort of boundary setting and like, oh, it's restrictive. That's sort of taking away my own freedom. Look, you have to make some level of sacrifice here if you want this process to work for you. If you want this badly enough, it will be a no-brainer to maybe cut back on some of this stuff. Like I say, and I want to stress this one more time, I hate to be so pedantic on this because most people get it, but there's some people, I have to say this again and again and again. Me saying that eating out can hold you back doesn't mean that you never can eat out again. That isn't my view, and that isn't what I have my clients do. But you might need some boundary or some rule about how many times you are going to eat out so you can stay structured here and stay on plan the vast majority of the time. And then when you do eat out, needless to say, you don't have to be perfect with every meal, and one bad meal isn't going to ruin your weight loss progress. But if you have the opportunity to, of course, my advice is to stick to the most sort of quote unquote whole foodsy items on the menu. That's going to be obvious. This doesn't mean you have to be perfect forever, but it might well be argued if you're eating out an awful lot right now, you might well need a period of sacrifice, see it as a period of abstinence to sort of detach and take food off, or take rather eating out in particular, off that pedestal of being such an important thing in your life, and just show yourself that you can still be happy and fulfilled and have a great social life without eating out so much, and achieve your health and weight loss goals at the same time. Number 8, nobody seems to get what you're doing. This is a big one, and you feel alone in your journey. This can be so discouraging, can't it, when you feel isolated? And I've certainly felt like that. Thankfully for me, I have felt for a very long part of my life, certainly all my adult life, that I'm very independent. And thankfully, whatever makeup of personality I have, it's allowed me to not take too much, or not to put too much stock in other people's perspectives or opinions on what I should or shouldn't be doing. I have developed some level of immunity to that, I suppose, and I'm very grateful for whatever it is in my DNA, my personality, my character that has allowed that over the years. But it is discouraging, and most people, they might not be quite so resilient as I, or as some of the people I work with. And so other people's comments really will get to them a little bit. And look, bottom line, and this even happens to me, we are social creatures. There's something in us that wants to comply, and it wants to fit in, and it wants to therefore oblige the movie night and the pizza night and all the meals out with friends, family, loved ones, colleagues, and so on. But you're going to have to ultimately be okay with the discomfort and maybe the social tension that can come with going against the grain, pardon the pun, going against the status quo and saying no. You're going to have to be okay with the tension that rises in you, and maybe the look that you see on someone else's face when you break some of the expectations they have on you. Because if you suddenly go from being the person that, you know, loves drinking wine on a Friday night with your partner or with your friends down the pub or in the bar, and you suddenly say, look, I'm giving the next one a miss after 15, 20 years of doing that, that's going to melt people's brains, right? Because they have such a set, rigid story of you, especially the people that have known you for a very long time. They tend to have such a rigid story of you that when you say you're not doing something, you might well be met with serious challenge in terms of, you know, like I spoke to a client yesterday about some of the guilt tripping that can happen. And I don't want to digress too much here, but just as an example, you know, comments or statements like, but I cake for you because you're vegan, so I wanted to do a nice vegan cake for you. People almost make you feel guilty to actually indulge in actions that you don't want to indulge in, actions that are actually harmful at this stage to your health. Certainly to do to a frequent degree. And so you've got to be careful of the social manipulation that, you know, even people that you love and respect will sort of, you know, project onto you. You've got to be very careful with this stuff. And it can, as I say, be very discouraging. But you have to be okay with it. You have to be okay with that tension. What do you say? Just as an example here, a couple of things, maybe write this stuff down. I don't need you. This is a line I like that I've taught several clients over the years. I don't need you to join in with what I'm doing. I don't need you to eat the meals I'm eating, but I would really value and respect it if you could be on my team with this. Oh, that's such a politician's line, isn't it? That's such a diplomatic line. It's really nice because you're basically telling someone how they could be better cherished and valued by you, how you might love and respect them more. You're basically telling them what they could do to have a greater relationship with you. Do you see the beauty in that? It's just that I think it's mostly that second part of the line, but the whole thing again, I don't need you to do what I'm doing. I don't need you to eat the meals that I'm eating. You can eat what you want, but I'd appreciate it so much. I'd really value it. I'd respect it so much if you could sort of just somewhat be on my team with this, because it means so much to me. I'm working with a coach, or I read this book. I'm really fired up right now, and I want to do this. I know that losing weight is really what I want to do now, and it's really going to improve my life. I'm so excited about it. And when you pitch it like that, people can't really say no. People aren't going to push back on that. They're going to seem really rude if they are. And then, like I say, it's mixed in with your sort of I would say sub-communicating, but frankly, it's fairly direct. You're literally laying out how you could like them more. You're not telling them what to do, because I hate when people tell you what to do. That's an awful thing that people do. So you're not telling people what to do, but you're very subtly saying, look, I would value and cherish our relationship even more. I'd really respect it if I had some level of support from you on this, that you could sort of leave me to it and understand why I'm doing this. And you don't have to be a very vocal cheerleader, but certainly not get in my way. Certainly not offer me pizza. Certainly not try and encourage me, when you're eating something off plan. I don't care if you do that. Fair enough. Fair enough. You do what you want to do. I don't judge you for it. But me personally, I'm trying to work on this stuff right now. And I'd really, really appreciate it if you didn't thrust pizza in my face every 10 minutes. No, don't say it like that. But you get what I mean. I really like that. So that's a good line. And then in terms of rebuttals, because some people, they're like, oh, do I try and debunk the protein thing when people start talking about that, or B12, et cetera, all those common sort of arguments against vegan eating? I think unless you're super, super confident on this stuff, because most people aren't, admittedly, until they're a bit more experienced and sort of well read up on this stuff. So until you're a bit more confident, I would honestly say something along the lines of, when someone sort of challenged you, said, for example, oh, what about the protein thing? Say something along the lines of, rather than trying to, sort of fight them and debate them on it, I don't know all that much about that. But what I do know is that I've lost 20 pounds and I feel the best I've felt in years right now. And that just ends the conversation right there. That's absolutely a great way to sort of silence the critics, let's say. Look, I don't know all that much about that, to be fair. I might have to do some more reading on that. But what I do know for sure is that I've lost 5 pounds. My skin is healthier than ever. And I've got so much energy. I just feel really, really amazing. And I think that's a really great silence. I think that's a really great line. So if you are feeling isolated and alone in what you're doing, I think that's natural. And it's going to be the way for a while until this way of eating sort of cottons on a bit more, I suppose, in wider society, which it seems to be progressively anyway. But you still are, quote unquote, going against the grain here. And you are going to be met with things that you find frustrating. Just stay cool. Remember to not take it personally. And also remember on that note that it's not actually about you. Because sometimes when we feel someone is attacking us, it's like, wow, a really personal thing. But it's usually more about the other person and their stories of what a healthy diet looks like, or their insecurities, or their envy that they can't commit to something, or that they maybe feel a bit guilty that they don't care so much about their health, or this, that, or the other. I think with the vegan thing, you see a lot of, like, people treat you as though that you automatically think you're better than them because they're vegan, and they start sort of trying to like morally justify, and it's like that's the last thing that pops in my head. Like, obviously I'm vegan for moral reasons too. I've spoken about that extensively. It means a lot to me. But honestly, I've been doing this so long now that it's not the first thought in my head, and I can't ignore the double standard that I was a meat eater completely ignorantly for 21 years of my life. So when I meet someone that eats meat, my immediate thought isn't, oh, this person is unethical and morally reprehensible. That's not my first thought, because that was me, right? So I see it more as more about sort of stories and programming and culture than I do people being a byproduct of the culture, more than anything necessarily about them. And that's why you shouldn't take it personally when people sort of say things to you that you perceive as rude, because it's often not about you, even though it feels like a personal attack. That's enough on that. Reason number 9 as to why you might still be overweight on a plant-based diet. Mock meats and other substitutes. Again, this doesn't need so much time. I've spent so much on this here, and generally I think my audience gets this now. It's really a case-by-case thing, though. That's what I will say, because, there's a stark difference between like a Beyond or Impossible burger and the sort of sweet potato and butternut squash burgers that I can get in Sainsbury's supermarket, just as an example. I don't know if they stock those, but just as an example here in the UK. One might be a bit more whole foods, either the other one might be filled with all sorts of quote unquote nasties, as I like to say. The caloric density might be very different. The macronutrient breakdown undoubtedly will be different. The fiber content will certainly be very different, and all the other bits thrown in there. So yes, generally it's a case by case, but I think as a rule of thumb, it's definitely wise to keep those mock meats and substitutes and cheeses and that sort of thing, and ice creams, to try and keep them at bay somewhat. I suppose the only obvious exception I can think of is the plant milks, because generally most of them are fairly compliant. They're not perfect necessarily unless you're making your own, but generally, they are okay as part of your diet. And I have them regularly. My clients have them regularly. They are okay. Some of them are a bit more processed and messed around with than others, but generally some of them are not too bad. But those sort of mock meats and the cheeses and some of the other substitutes, just be really careful with them. Generally, as I say, we've got to focus on those whole foods. I don't need to sort of ram this one home too much. You get it already. Why? Well, it's the calorie density, isn't it? As I say, it's the fiber content, it's the vitamin and mineral profile, and they've just got fewer added nasties, don't they? Whole foods. And finally, number 10, the final one, and I had to finish on this because it's the exercise. You're not moving your body. That's reason number 10 as to why you might not be losing weight on a plant-based diet. You're not moving your body right now. The other 9 points have all been about the nutrition side of things. And whilst even in I've done this for years, but in my last video, I really reinforced the idea that certainly as a weight loss beginner, particularly so, nutrition is going to be what moves the needle most of all for the average weight loss. It absolutely is. But that being true, it being true that nutrition seems to be the most impactful, factor for weight loss, should not give you the green light to just disregard exercise. And I think that sometimes happens in this community. I've generally taken the stance over the last couple of years that other diet, quote unquote, communities overvalue the role that exercise plays. And the vegan plant-based community, again, as a collective, which is really not a fair way to assess it, but generally, based on the conversations I have and what I observe, the vegan plant-based community seems to actually underestimate the role that exercise can have on health, well-being, fitness, and weight loss. So just be really, really careful with this, I would say, to not completely disregard it whatsoever. No, I mixed two words there. Altogether, I should say. You can tell I've been going too long now. We've got to wrap up soon. But yeah, don't disregard it altogether under this sort of guise that, well, it's all about the food, right? It's all about food. I don't say it's all about the food. I say it's largely about the food. Sounds like a subtle distinction, but I think that's really crucial to highlight. So yeah, this being true about nutrition, that it's the most impactful factor for weight loss, as I say, should not give you the green light to totally disregard exercise. It can really speed up your efforts. And of course, there are a myriad of benefits to exercise beyond just weight loss, beyond just those numbers on the scale. It does amazing things for both your physical and certainly mental health and well-being. What do I recommend you start with? Gentle, low-intensity movements. That's what my beginners do when they sign up to my program. We have the Slow Go Cardio Training Plan, and the first 4 weeks is primarily walking and very low commitment walking as well. Not brisk pace power walking, not doing 10,000 steps a day or anything like that. We build up things in time. Start small, start gentle, and match things to your fitness level. As you improve, as you get weight off, your joints and whatnot, you'll be in a better position to do some of that more intense stuff. And that is great for you. And as you guys know, I do the Muay Thai stuff, I do tennis, I do weight training. I don't recommend all those things to my clients, though. These are things that I love and that I've trained myself to be able to do in time and to be able to handle and not have injury and burnout and get sick of it and make it unsustainable. No, this is stuff I've built up to. That hasn't happened overnight. I haven't become really, really sort of fitness and athletic oriented overnight. That has happened over time. Generally speaking, the amount of weight you can lose just with a little bit of sort of gentle, low intensity stuff and the right food choices can actually be quite amazing. You don't have to do all those boot camp classes and HIIT workouts, certainly not in the beginning phases anyway. So start with the gentle stuff and you'll be amazed, actually, if you're not doing any exercise whatsoever, you'll be amazed by just how 30 minutes a day of very gentle exercise can actually really contribute to quite a change in your fortunes on the scale. I think that's it, my friends. Let me know which of these reasons resonated with you most of all. I'm afraid I don't have time for questions today. I thought I might at one stage, so not that I ever promised it, but forgive me for that, because I do like to get to them, and I thank you for your comments. I know there's not been many because I'm doing it at this live stream rather unannounced and at an early time of day. But do leave any questions down in the comment section below if you're watching this replay, and I'll try to get to those in time. Thank you very much for your time. If you need more help finally with weight loss and want to lose up to 20 to 25 pounds in the next 12 weeks without having to count calories and do endless amounts of extreme exercise, as I just spoke about, I'm taking applications for my vegan Slim and Sustain 2.0 coaching program. So simply head to ryanadamscoaching.com. Once more, that's ryanadamscoaching.com, or click the link in the description box down below in this video to learn more and apply there. Thanks once more for your time. Hope you found this useful. Wow, 45 minutes. I'll see you soon, folks. Thank you very much. Bye.